So thanks for everyone that showed up today. We are going to have this recorded, so I will send out the link to everyone that could not make it, just because it is a great topic and a very interesting one that I know a lot of people want to hear about. We're going to do things a little backwards today. So we do have Aaron Voss from TrueNorth. He will be talking about some cyber awareness and some cyber security. He has a few updates on how everything has been going over the past year since, everything has been online. That's one of the things that the pandemic has now made everyone transition to, especially us. We're doing more Zoom meetings. Everything is now in the cloud. And so it'll be a really interesting topic to learn more about. And he wants to keep it open, so feel free to ask questions as needed. First, though, I am going to introduce Dominique from LJ Roth. They are our sponsors, and she has to hop off the call. So I wanted to give her a quick chance to kind of talk about LJ Roth and what they have to offer for everyone before she has to hop off. And then we'll do the drawing for the gift cards at the end yet. I'll turn it over to you.
Kaylee, thank you. Hi, everyone. I apologize that I have to get off. We had a lot of calls over the weekend. So, my name is Dominique Cornick. I'm with LJ Roth Restoration Service, and we kind of the folks, right? Nobody has to call it, right? Fire, water, mold, and storm. We've had a pretty great year this year, which we're grateful for. We also celebrated 50 years this year, so that was super exciting. But past that, there's not, I don't know, nothing too crazy, but we're happy to be sponsoring the meeting this month. I apologize that I have to hop off though today. So just kind of a jam-packed Monday, but.
We hear you there. It's a Monday.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. If anyone has anything else, I will turn it over to Aaron Voss.
Excellent. Kaylee, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming today. As Kaylee mentioned, we got a relatively small group here. So if anybody has any questions or wants additional details about any of the stuff that we talk about today, feel free to just kind of raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask those questions, and I can kind of go into a little bit more detail on a particular topic or a particular area as we go along. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So give me 1 second. And then, okay, you guys should see my full screen PowerPoint presentation. Looks good?
All awesome. Good.
Okay. So I always like to start out by talking about some of the somewhat recent data breaches and some stats around what those really involved and what they meant. These three are somewhat relevant to the topic of working from home, or they're just recent data breaches that had an exceptionally big payout associated with them. So the CNA financial one, I'm guessing everybody's probably heard about that data breach. Happened earlier this year. The most notable part about this breach was that the ransom of $40 million was actually paid by the organization. And they had fought that their systems were redundant enough and they had good backups in place to be able to continue on or respond to this particular ransomware attack. Unfortunately, when it came down to it, they did not. So the only way that they were able to get the data back was to pay that $40 million to the attackers that broke into their system. Now, ultimately, nobody wants to pay the ransomware, but I think this just really highlights that, oftentimes with, backup and recovery type systems, they might not necessarily be as redundant or as reliable as companies hope for. So as we can see, these ransoms get exceptionally high. This ransom or this particular incident also affected a very large amount of people. So 75,000 people had their data exfiltrated from CNA as well. So this organization didn't just deal with the ransomware event where their systems were shut down and inaccessible. They also had data that left their systems prior to that attack. So this had a really large effect. The next one, which had kind of a rippling effect over the oil industry, is the Colonial Pipeline. And this one made really, really big news. It led to some people going out and buying, plastic bags full of gasoline and things like that, being concerned that there wasn't going to be enough available. Shut down the entire pipeline. Colonial ended up paying a 4.4 million ransom to get access to their systems back online. And even then, after they had paid it, it took them a decent amount of time to even get those systems back up and running. While the ransom isn't necessarily exceptionally high, what's interesting about this particular attack is that this attack came about because Colonial Pipeline implemented a new system to allow workers to work remotely as part of the pandemic. They implemented a VPN system that wasn't adequately protected through some sort of secondary factor like multi-factor authentication or something like that. An attacker was able to find stolen, reused credentials from an employee online, either through some sort of phishing, social engineering, or through password reuse, which is very common. And then they were able to use those credentials to get into Colonial Pipeline's network. So if it wouldn't have been for this kind of update and change to the way that they do business, they probably wouldn't have experienced this particular breach. So this one's notable, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the risks around flexible work and working from home in a minute. Then the last one, and this is just kind of here to kind of highlight that there's no particular industry that's more targeted than one or other. A lot of this time it's a crime of opportunity. So what can we get into and what can we do? JBS was another really interesting recent data breach that shut down that large food processor. And these guys, this was a social engineering attack. So this was another attack that came in through that deception and phishing and stuff that we're probably all becoming way too common and what it is that we're seeing day to day. So beyond that, we've done some kind of research and understanding on what are kind of the top 2021 going into 2022 security threats, and I've really identified that there's four. Some of these have just always kind of been around. Some of them are becoming more scary and more relevant because of this switch to the cloud and work from home. So the first one is just cloud-based threats. So as things transition to the cloud, you've got a little bit less control, and the skill set that it takes to protect cloud assets and resources are different. So a lot of the times we have IT individuals who kind of grew up with servers in the closet, with that being able to touch and maintain everything. Everything was kind of connected. We could build the moat firewall around our systems, and as long as we kept people out of the moat and didn't have them on ladders climbing over the walls into the castle, we were somewhat safe. As that has changed and we've moved into the cloud, we're seeing that the security practices and the way that you protect that data when it's publicly accessible like that is different. So cloud-based threats are becoming more common. How you protect things again in the cloud is different. The controls are much different, and really just the administration and the complexity has changed. So that leads to issues with misconfiguration, extended outages. Hey, I thought my cloud was redundant and secure. Nope, it's not. A lot of people think that just because they put their information in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that it's their responsibility to protect it anymore. And that's absolutely not the case. Microsoft, Amazon, all the big cloud providers, if you have some sort of an issue that's caused by a configuration problem within their system that you caused, they're not going to cover that. That's not going to be their responsibility. That's kind of what you're signing up for. So this just change to the way that we approach and consume services has been a big threat in 2021. Next one up here is ransomware. So I think everybody's probably heard of ransomware. For those that haven't, ransomware is a special kind of software that gets onto a computer, a network, a device, and essentially renders that device useless. It'll take any of the data that's on there. It'll encrypt it in a way that can't be decrypted without getting a special key back from the actor. And then most of the time we'll shut down that system so that its functionality is somewhat limited. This leads to the inability to access that system, to access that data. As we talked about a few minutes ago in the recent breaches, this can have a significant financial impact. We see this impacting not only by having to pay the ransom, but also through the business interruption as well. And then any notifications that you might have to provide to those individuals whose data might have been accessed or exfiltrated to use in some sort of a malicious way. I saw a recent study, and I put the stats on here as it relates to ransomware attacks. So we're seeing two trends that we don't like in ransomware. The first being that the average downtime from a ransomware attack is increasing. So in 2020, it was about 16 days. Today, we're seeing that about 23 days. So that is not good. That's less, that's more downtime. That's less, or that's more recovery time. And that's definitely not a positive. The other thing that we're starting to see is that attackers are combining the way that they're, really interfering and how it is that they're attacking networks. Previously we had seen a lot of, it's just about trying to get the data and then selling it to somebody, or it's just about shutting down your system and trying to get that ransomware payment. Now we're seeing both at the same time. Attackers go in, they get a foothold inside the network, they exfiltrate out the data, they take the relevant data that they want, and then when they get done, they run ransomware on it. So essentially they're getting multiple paydays for a single attack. They're getting a payday from being able to sell that data on the dark web, and they're also getting a payday from you hopefully paying that ransomware fine to be able to restore your services. So that means then on the claims side of things, you could have claims where you're paying out for multiple different things, not just for, business interruption and things like that, but notification requirements as well. Next to top security threats is remote worker mobility. So as we talked about with the Colonial breach, the way that people access your network and the way that they're able that they do their jobs is no longer within the four walls. So that inherently adds more risk and more attack surface area to your network, because that connectivity and that accessibility has to exist outside the network. And where it might have been okay previously to provide a small subset of access to your network for people to be able to work remotely, that's no longer the case, right? We need to be able to provide the same access, the same capabilities, all of that sort of stuff when we're at home for our remote colleagues as we do when we're in the office. So that sees additional adoption of things like VPNs and remote desktop services and those sort of things. And as people expand that scope, that increases that network footprint. So where I could normally, as a systems administrator, be able to tightly control all of my devices, I can't do that as much anymore because they're now spread out throughout wherever it is that they might be. So that's a big security threat. And then this concept of BYOD, or bring your own device. So a lot of organizations in the past had adopted if you want to work on our network, you've got to have a device that's supplied by us. And with COVID and more flexibility around that wasn't always necessarily an option. And so a lot of organizations had moved to, you can use your home computer or your personal devices as long as we've got a little bit of security around it. As an administrator and a technical person, I don't have as much control over a personal device, and honestly, I should not. But I need to make sure that I understand the risk that goes along with that. And so just that, having that company data on a device is inherently more risky. And then the last one on here, and this is one that's been an issue for years. I think I talked to this group, gosh, it's probably been 5 or 6 years back. Social engineering was a huge topic when we spoke back then. It continues to be a huge topic now. Social engineering, phishing continues to be one of the #1 first steps in a data breach. You've got to get some sort of a foothold established. You've got to get some additional information. And, unfortunately, the weakest link in most systems are the users that use that system. Computers, for the most part, are predictable, and they do the same things over and over again. Humans have discretion, they have judgment, they have all of those things that make them a target for people, and means that their processes aren't necessarily always followed. I get it. I do things not consistently all the time in the name of speed, accuracy, and customer service, but that's a huge risk. So social engineering will always be on one of these top security threats lists. It continues to be in 2021, and for those reasons listed there. So I'm going to dive into a couple of these a little bit more, starting with social engineering. So the people aspect of technology, again, makes up a huge portion of what leads to data breaches. So that can be a magnitude of different things. It can be inadequate security technologies. It can be operational processes and people failures being #1. We talked about that when we were talking about clouds, right? Inconsistent configuration or configuration errors are big. Again, it doesn't take a whole lot to check the wrong box and all of a sudden there's some sort of a IT issue that can lead to accidental access. You've got to worry about things like malicious insiders, et cetera. People are a big risk. So social engineering, I think we've all probably seen it before. For a definition, because everybody loves definitions, social engineering is really, the clever manipulation of natural human tendency to trust. So there are a magnitude of different ways that social engineering applies. Everything from phishing to vishing, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, tailgating, pretexting. There's just multiple ways, and don't always necessarily think that email is the only way that we see these particular types of attacks. So I'm going to talk about a couple different types of phishing. And I think it's interesting to just know that for the more targeted ones, so we basically see three kinds. Mass scale phishing, which is I'm going to cast a net out into the ocean and it's going to be generic and just kind of there, and I hope I catch somebody. It's relatively common, but most systems have gotten to the point now where they'll catch that. Right, it's somewhat predictable, so you can catch it. The next one on here, spear phishing, is one that we're seeing a substantial increase in. And the reason why spear phishing is dangerous is because most of the time those spear phishing campaigns are targeted at the person or the organization with which is receiving that message. So I've got a couple of examples coming up here, but we regularly see and have probably even seen with increased frequency, malicious third parties and actors going out doing research on organizations or individuals within an organization, and then turning around and using that information to do phishing attacks. So that could be as simple as something like you had a new intern class and that came into your organization and posted about it on LinkedIn or your social media. Going out, grabbing that list of individuals who just came into your organization as interns and turning around and using that information to phish those individuals. I know that one's real because we saw it this summer. Somebody had gone out, found a post on our organization, and then utilized that information, pretended to be an executive, and sent phishing emails to those particular people, asking them to do things that they probably shouldn't do, like go buy gift cards and that sort of stuff. So it's definitely happening. We've even seen it from smaller organizations, right? 10, 20 type people. Anybody is a target here. And when you add that additional context into an email, it makes it very, very hard for people to distinguish whether or not that's a legitimate email or not. So just be on the lookout for that. Spear phishing is definitely an increase. And then the last one is whaling. As far as phishing emails goes, and these are it's spear phishing. It's taking that information, but it's targeting very high value targets within the organization. So think CFOs, CEOs, those sort of people who might have access to large amounts of information, or who may be able to access things that maybe the accounts receivable person might not be able to. So whaling is also really big. And again, it's really the difference between spear phishing and whaling is just the target of those particular attacks. So I've got a couple of examples here. You might recognize one of the names on this email. I think he's a member of your group. If not, he was in the past. But this is an actual email that we received from externally into our organization. So this is a hi Heidi. I would like to have my direct deposit information updated with my new account. Can the change be effective for current pay? What's interesting about this email is it says it's from an employee. It's directed to the person that would probably make this change within our organization. And it asks them to do something in a relatively short amount of time. So if you weren't paying attention, you would think that Matt had sent Heidi, who was going to make this payroll change, this email on this request. So this is that spear phishing that we talked about on the last slide. And thankfully Heidi's really diligent. She takes all of our security awareness training and pays a lot of attention to these things. But if she wasn't, this could have been a huge mistake and a big issue for us. Could have updated payment information and sent it in the wrong place. Luckily, they've got some good processes in place that wouldn't have happened. But you can kind of see what it's like when people are doing that spear phishing. We've got another one here as well. So this is another great example of one that we received. Also, Dwayne Smith is the chairman of our board. Somebody went out and registered a new email, put his name on it, and then sent one of our interns a phishing email asking them to send him the phone number of their cell phone. We see this attack relatively frequently where we're trying to change communication channels. So in this particular email, it's asking for a cell phone number. Now, the next step would be, I want to take the social engineering attack out of email, where IT has more control and visibility, and move it into cell phone text-based communications, where they might not, where there's less control, there's more opportunities for me to directly interact with that person without the risk that I'm going to get caught. So as we talked about again, social engineering doesn't just happen over emails. Oftentimes we'll see it over these other channels as well, sometimes as part of a single attack or part of a longer attack or a larger attack that's going on. Has anybody here ever heard of vishing before? Okay, so this is one that we saw start to pop up and probably get more frequent as COVID kind of ramped up and people started using their cell phones for email, or sorry, for communication within the office, and started to publish that information more readily available. So I'm going to play this and hopefully you guys can hear it. This is a great example of a phishing.
Hello, this is ADP alerting you to a security issue with your account. We have tried to reach you via email and have been unsuccessful. Your current ADP account has been locked out of precaution for your security. Please press 1 now to speak with a representative or visit adpsecurity.com to reset your password. Thank you.
So hopefully you guys heard that. That was a voicemail from ADP telling me that my account was locked out and I needed to visit adpsecurity.com to update it. I made that voicemail using a text-to-voice service that took me about 30 seconds. And nobody necessarily needs to raise their hand. And I got a question about this when I spoke on this previously, was how did I know that you use ADP? I don't, but I'm guessing that at least 1 or 2 people on this phone call probably do. Because it is the most popular HRIS system that exists out there. Similarly to the way that Microsoft Office 365 is the most popular email platform. So I don't necessarily need to be specific and know a whole lot about this individual. I can just guess. And if I hit 10% of people that actually use ADP and think that this voicemail is legitimate, it's a mindset shift. I'm thinking phishing emails and phishing and social engineering are going to come through email. They're not going to come through voicemail. So I got this voicemail, ADP security, not ADP's website, but I can sure as well make it look like it's ADP's website, and then collect your ADP credentials and utilize them to perpetuate some sort of an attack within the organization. So again, social engineering, it's not just email, it's voicemails, it's text messages. The text message on the screen we got reported as well. It's trying to get you to click on that link. Again, it's out of the system. It's out of the normal IT system and the things that it handles. Less controls and honestly, probably more success.
Hello.
Oops, we don't need to hear that again. Okay. So beyond just the social engineering that exists in the digital world, there's also social engineering that exists in the physical world as well. So tailgating, which is not necessarily a term that everybody's familiar with, is using that same kind of approach to manipulating an individual in the physical world. So that's things like following people into a building that you're not supposed to be into, utilizing a badge, trying to make your way through some sort of a security checkpoint without being caught. I don't think people give enough credit to how bold some individuals may be when it comes to doing this. If you're not paying attention to social engineering at the physical level, you probably need to. So things about, making sure that badges are checked, etc. I have a great example of this one that actually happened in Cedar Rapids. So there was a medical organization who found out that somebody had snuck their way into their building and had been walking around that facility, and they had been taking purses and personal data off of people's desks. They finally ended up getting caught because they got to the point where they were just being exceptionally careless and trying to hide themselves from detection. But they had been in the building for hours before that happened. I participate in some local networking groups with information security professionals that do this sort of social engineering as part of their testing of organizations. And they said people are very trusting. They are, have more than a 50% success rate when they go in to assess organizations on whether or not they can get in and get to the information that they need. And it's really just because, again, people don't pay as much attention to it. If you think about how much data might be available on somebody's computer or sitting on somebody's desk, this can be a huge deal, making sure that you're protecting that physical security as well. And again, back to tying it to social engineering, oftentimes it's I'm wearing the right shirt, I say the right things, I'm into where it is that I need to go. So make sure that we're paying attention to that, and probably down a little bit with COVID just because we don't have as many people in buildings as we maybe did previously, but still a big risk. I have a little bit of information in here on response. We probably won't talk a whole lot about it, but as you're working on social engineering and trying to figure out how you combat these things, there's really 3 things that you got to make sure that you're doing to kind of reduce the likelihood that you'll fall victim to one of these attacks. First of all, it's important that you're providing training. So you're covering things like how to identify phishing emails, what you should do with those phishing emails when they come in. And then same thing with tailgating and vishing and smishing and all of the other issues that go into those things. So training is number 1 important. Without training, people don't necessarily know how to respond and what they should do when they see those types of attacks. Make sure okay. Excuse me. The next thing on here is assessments. So not only is it important that you train, but it's also important that you validate whether or not that training is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Oftentimes you'll see that as either tests or simulated phishing emails are exceptionally popular and somewhat effective in gauging the effectiveness of your training program. And then last but not least, security controls. So if all else fails, make sure that you've got kind of the tried and true security controls in place to protect your organization in case it does get past that person part of it. So things like multi-factor authentication, email scanning tools, system monitoring, etc. I have a couple phishing awareness tips, things that you can kind of look out for really, really quick to make sure that a phishing email is not, or an email is not phishing. Check the sender, make sure the domain's correct. Always question, if it's not your job, why am I receiving this email? If somebody emailed me and asked me to change somebody's payroll information, I would question that because that's not my job. I would definitely could connect them with the right person, but that's just one red flag that you always want to make sure that it's noticed. Is it a public domain? I can go out and register as many Gmail, Yahoo, MSN, live email accounts as I really want to at any particular time. Public domains, those sort of email services should always be underneath a little bit more scrutiny. And then what is the return address? And this one's really important, and most people don't know this. You can see what the return address is or where that message is going to go back to if you reply to it by clicking on reply within Outlook. The sender and the reply address are most of the time not the same when it comes to phishing emails. So I can say that I am, Dwayne Smith at TrueNorthCompanies.com as my from address, but then I can have it go to Aaron, I'm going to hack you at gmail.com if you reply. And that's a very common tactic, and you can easily see where that came from just by clicking reply. Don't send the email, but just hit reply on your mailbox, and you can see where that's going to end up going. Email content, grammar and spelling, links and attachments. If somebody never sends you a link to access a document and all of a sudden you get an email from them that's vague and it says, hey, click this link to get the document that I sent you, question that. Most people don't change their practices frequently. So always look to see, is this the normal way that people are communicating with me, or is this the normal way that people are transferring data with me? Sense of urgency is a big one. As soon as possible, needs done today are all keywords for don't pay too much attention to this, let's do it. So look out for things that say, I need this as soon as possible. Don't contact me any other way. Make sure that I have this at, today, etc. Watch out for that language. And then the last one on here is if you click an email link and it immediately asks you as the first step to provide a username and password to see the content, I would have that as a red flag. Back to the whole, it needs to be done today as soon as possible. This is just one of those things that people are so used to putting their username and password in multiple times a day that it just is, it's almost a natural habit anymore, right? It's something that people do. Most of the time, you won't have that as the first step. It might be a secondary step. So make sure that if you click on an email and the first thing it does is ask you for username and password, go back and look at the original email and do a double check to make sure that everything's the way that it's supposed to be. Let's see, where are we at for time? We're about a half hour. I'm going to talk a little bit more about data security in the flexible work environment, which is COVID and work from home. As I mentioned at the beginning, work from home and that flexibility comes along with, you know, different risks that maybe your organization is not necessarily thinking about today, but can be a huge issue. Think about the physical security of working at home. You know, inside most organizations, we have things like locking filing cabinets, shred bins, all of those sort of things that help make that space more secure and allow you to easily dispose of things that you don't need anymore. Think about what that means when you're working from home, right? Do you have a shred bin? Do you have a paper shredder? Do you have the ability to lock up data and things like that when you're at home? Not doing so can expose and does expose, you know, that particular physical data outside of the office and can be a big risk. Lastly on here, as it relates to data security and the flexible work environment, we're seeing a lot more issues with, as I spoke about previously, employee versus company-owned equipment. So as I said at the beginning, if I'm an administrator, I have a set way that I set up computers, a set number of controls and things that I do for Jim's computer, for my computer, for Jack's, for everybody's. I make sure that I've got antivirus. I make sure that there's no malicious software on it. I make sure that the updates are all applied. All of these things that are happening with your device that most of the time just happens in the background. When you're working from home, you don't necessarily have that, that capability if you're managing your own equipment. I'm guessing if we were to do a poll, when was the last time you ran Windows updates on your home computer? I guess probably nobody can answer that question. I can answer it for all the computers at TrueNorth because it happens every week, just how it operates. So things like that are huge. There's continuously security updates that are coming out. You know, we've seen incidents where a home computer gets compromised and then that computer just sits and runs, collects information. And when the person leaves for the day, you know, if that computer is connected to the corporate network, it's a jump off point to get in after hours. You know, I can remotely control and do those sort of things. So that BYOD, that bring your own device, that company, that employee owned equipment, it is a risk, and it's something that people need to make sure that they're paying attention to and considering compensating for. Ways to do that: process improvements, making sure that things are working the way that they're supposed to, effective auditing, training, making sure employees understand the difference between securing themselves at home versus securing themselves in the office, and then following just general security best practices around password hygiene, proper data storage, all of those things that need to happen both in the workplace and at home. So I've added a couple new slides to this, and I think it's important because this is really kind of more tied to the insurance space and really what it is that I think people are seeing as far as it relates to claims and changes in the way that carriers address cyber as a whole. So, if anybody has questions about this, this is some relatively updated information that I just got within the last week or so from Marshberry. So it's somewhat interesting data. Claims wise, it's seeing about a 55% increase year over year in loss ratios, indicating that there is industry-wide underwriting losses. So I think that insurance companies are getting smarter in the way that they're writing these things and what the controls and stuff that they're requiring, but it's taken them time to get to that point. Cyber continues to be, we continue to see a lot of claims, and there's probably people on this call that are more familiar with this stuff than I am because it's not the space that I play in all the time. But what I'm seeing on the security side of things is just more requirements around what it is that organizations even have to do to be able to be covered by cyber policies. So we know that we're seeing increased cyber premiums as well. We've had some different, I've heard of some different clients who have had, substantial plus% increases year to year. I think we're also seeing quite a bit of more requirements to even have basic security controls in place. So you guys are probably seeing that as well. People that work closely with, you know, on the renewal side of things, you know, outside of claims. And I'm not 100% sure of everybody's kind of roles and responsibilities on this particular call, but I know, you know, for some of the larger carriers, we're getting the MFA requirements attestation very, very heavily. So we've got a couple carriers now that, you know, if you don't carry multi-factor authentication, both for remote access, email, and for systems administration, they're not interested in giving you a quote the next time your policy renews. I think this is going to be, I have a feeling this is going to continue as time goes on. This is the first more kind of like line in the sand control requirement, I think, that we've seen from carriers. But I think that as they continue to mature how it is they write this stuff and what it is that they're willing to cover, we'll continue to see more and more of that, which then starts to tie insurance back to what technology are you utilizing to protect the system and how are you doing it to reduce that risk of a claim. So we're seeing quite a bit of that. And then this is another graphic that they provided as well, and some of the controls that are being asked for coming along with applications and renewals. So a lot of companies ask for MFA controlled access, making sure that that's in place, securing and testing backups, patching systems, filtering emails, protecting privileged accounts, protecting networks, securing endpoints, logging and monitoring is starting to become a requirement, vulnerability management, incident response. Incident response continues to be a question that not only insurance carriers are asking for, we're also seeing a lot of that on the regulatory side of things as well. Just whether or not that's, you know, the state of New York, whether or not that's some updates to Graham-Leach-Bliley if your organization or clients are a financial institution covered by that particular regulation. All of these things are underneath a lot more scrutiny, and it's because of all the stuff that we talked about above. They're good controls to help mitigate that social engineering and prevent data breaches. So that's what I got as far as a formalized presentation, but I'm happy to have any additional questions or dialogue around any of the stuff that I talked about or anything security related as a whole.
That was good stuff, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Interesting. Are you, for lack of a, are you finding a lot of this is, and maybe statewide or regionally, not so much, you know, nationally or worldwide, kind of human error on people carelessness, not paying attention, people making stupid decisions as far as like the emails people receive?
I don't think that people are intentionally being careless. I think that, you know, just as a whole, as a general statement, people want to do their jobs quickly, provide good service, and be able to just continue to move on. I think as a society, we are rather just busy individuals as a whole. And so, you know, that change in process, you know, the way I did it at the office versus the way I do it at home can be different. And it can be different just enough to throw people off of their normal training and things that they would have, you know, done differently when they were back in the office versus at home. So I think that's been a driver and why you've seen more of these social engineering attacks be effective, just because it's different.
Mm-hmm.
How about reporting these? Like if you have, you notice one comes through, what happens? What steps should we take if we report it? Or is there really nothing we can do?
So it depends upon whether or not the attack was actually successful in being able to get some sort of information out of your system. So just a regular phishing email that comes in, you know, your organization probably gets, depending upon its size, you know, tens to hundreds of them in any particular day. There's a lot of this stuff that's going on. Some of it is actually human driven, where there's a person sitting there behind the keyboard trying to attack you. Some of it, you know, utilizes the same cool AI technology that businesses are trying to utilize to make people's lives better. So where they're picking up information and doing research in that way. You know, with inside TrueNorth, and what I normally recommend for organizations who maybe have security resources that can respond to these things is that to report them to a centralized location within the organization. So we use a platform called KnowBe4, which does security training, and then it also allows you to report those emails. We actually investigate pretty much every single one that comes through to make sure that a couple of different things happened. One, nobody else received the email. If more than one person received the email, we'll actually go out and snag it from people's mailboxes and delete it before they have an opportunity to touch it or interact with it. The other thing that we'll do is we'll look at if it was a link or an attachment or something like that. Did the person actually open it or did they click on it? If they did, then we kick off a whole our internal playbook response system where we reach out to that person, we understand what it was, we have them change their password if they clicked on the link, and kind of kick off that whole thing. Now, not everybody has the resources internally to be able to do that, but it has proven beneficial to us in the past to have that response for when people actually fall for these phishing emails. I think that as it relates to that, I think it's important to know that for a long time, one of the first things that happened when you clicked on a phishing email was somebody snagged your credentials and they turned around and used those credentials to sign into your email mailbox. Okay, so that particular access is called an email or a business email compromise. That's what the kind of official cyber term for that happening is. So somebody got into your mailbox. Most of the time, especially at the smaller scale, it doesn't really go any farther than that. It just gets into that particular system. But what's dangerous about that is that a lot of organizations and individuals use their mailboxes for a wide variety of things, and there's a lot of data inside of those mailboxes, which could be valuable to those particular people who got access to it. Now, I just heard a story and an update from another organization that operates in the state of New York, state of New York has some of the most restrictive and stringent cyber rules. You don't even have to be domiciled there. You just have to operate within that state. That's it. And for this particular organization, they fell victim to a phishing email. Somebody was able to grab that individual's credentials and sign into the mailbox. As a result of that, they found out about it. Since they operate in the state of New York, they had to report that to the state of New York. In doing so, it triggered the state of New York to do an investigation into that organization, which led to them finding more mailboxes that were compromised, and the state requiring that they manually go through every single email that was in each of those mailboxes, collect whether there was any personal identifiable information in them, and then more than likely the state's going to require that they notify every single person whose name was in that mailbox. So to date, they haven't started that notification process. They're guessing they've got about $250,000 in investigation costs to this point, not counting what they're going to have to pay to notify. So little things like phishing emails and stuff like that can very, very quickly turn into huge, huge issues for organizations. So moral of that story, an email mailbox compromise where somebody gains access just to a mailbox is not necessarily a small event. It needs to be addressed like it was an actual data breach, because it quite possibly could be. Sorry for the doom and gloom.
No, that was perfect. Good
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, honesty.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much. Anyone else have anything else for Aaron?
I appreciate the time today. I love talking about this stuff, so happy to let you guys
Thank you.
hear me talk for a little while.
Very interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Aaron. All right. So to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll get the giveaways. So we have 14 people on. And Aaron, I'm going to ask you to be our first one to pick a number 1 through 14.
Let's do 12.
12. Eric, you are our big first winner today. Now, Eric, are you on here? Are you able to pick the next number?
I am,
for us?
sorry. I
Nope,
am.
you're all
Hi,
right.
everyone. It's my first time joining you guys, so it's a pleasant surprise.
Yes. Well, thank you. We're glad you're here. So glad you at least come away with something too today.
That's silly. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, if you'll pick a number from 1 to 14, excluding 12, that would be great.
Let's go with 3.
3. Mike, you're never gonna believe it. You're up again.
Wow, I am on a roll.
You are. I'm gonna just take your name off this. That's crazy. All right, last one. Who's the big winner, Mike?
8.
Scott. Just topped off, it looks like. All right, well, I will get him down then. Okay, so our next meeting is going to be on December. Double check here. Is it December 20th? Now, Dawn, can you verify? I will have to. It will be, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
December
20th.
20th. I thought that worked out. So we will have someone from QLI and they will be speaking to us about some telehealth. So telehealth rehabilitation. So that'll be a good topic, kind of once again, to go with the pandemic, which has changed everything, and how telehealth has now become a really important piece. So does anyone have anything else for the good of the cause today? All right, then everyone enjoy their Thanksgiving holiday and we'll see you all in a month.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.